Perfect.
Okay, Belen, I think we can start. So the stage is
Super.
yours.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Are you all seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Good. So welcome back again to our Knowledge Build series. The topic of today is to discuss ESG in practice. So before we jump into the recap, no, what do we have planned for today, no, and what is the objective of our third field? The idea of this session is to discuss and understand how ESG factors are integrated into the investment process. What are the main tools and frameworks that are being used today in the industry? And we're going to be also discussing the ESG process for Rancilio that we've been working on together with Lorenzo, Stefania, and Massimo. And then we will look into some examples from other organizations and other fund managers on how they apply ESG. The idea is to maintain an open discussion, no? So as always, please feel free to interrupt, to ask questions, share thoughts. And yeah, that's a bit the agenda and how we have structured the session for today. Do you have any questions?
If I may add my 2 cents here. So, as Belen said, the idea is to actually, you all remember that we presented the new risk framework for Rancilio Cube. And we actually developed the sustainability risk framework together with Belen. So today's session will give us a way more in-depth look on the context, about the context in which we developed this framework. So super happy to have a full house. Prego.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for the background. I think that was a really good addition, no, to introduce this session. And just as a little recap, we're on our third session, no, as part of this training program focused on short knowledge base. To set the ground, I know this is not new to any of us. We all know about ESG, what they stand for. But before we jump into the practice, I just wanted to spend a few minutes with you to recap, no, on what is ESG. So I think it's important to say that it's a framework to assess risk and opportunities, no, and risk and opportunities on the environmental, social, and governance side. The focus then is on risk management and long-term performance. This is the key. This is the simplest, and this is the background to what is ESG. Then what it means to do ESG investing is to incorporate these three aspects into the decision-making process, to be able to assess the risk return profile of an investment opportunity with these lenses, um, helping us to identify businesses that have good practices in place that will prevent exposure to certain risks that over time will create a value, no? So I'm connecting now a bit with the idea of this value creation over time that I think it's a bit the why to ESG, no? I think firstly, we have a compliance aspect to it, no, which is around regulation and how ESG comes into place, no, that many investors jump into this ESG world, no, into the assessment of this environmental, social, and governance risk because of compliance and risk management, no. But if we also look at the short, medium, and long-term perspective, ESG is not a values overlay. It is a risk, opportunity, and value creation strategy, no? So ESG can also be seen as a risk mitigation tool and long-term value creation for a portfolio of investments, no? So I think here the key message, no, that I want to convey, no, is that it can all start with a regulatory, no, or a compliance matter in terms of risk management and fiduciary duties, but then over time it goes to value protection, and ultimately it can generate value to the portfolio. And how do we integrate ESG into the investment cycle? No, because many times we only see like an ad hoc practice, no, of a screening practice, or maybe only on the portfolio monitoring and reporting. But actually ESG it's embedded, no, or can be embedded at every stage of the investment cycle. So if we go step by step, for example, what would be the ESG focus, no, at the screening and pipeline building phase? The idea or the goal of integrating this ESG approach is to identify red flags, to exclude against sectors, and to comply with minimum standards. No? And we're now going to be seeing this in a very practical way with examples. But then if no major red flags are identified, and in terms of sector exclusion and minimum standards, we're okay, we would go into the due diligence phase. This is the moment where the ESG assessment happens, no? And the purpose of these phases from an ESG perspective is to really analyze what are the material ESG risk and what are the opportunities for improvement as well. With this information, one can go into the investment decision and have a more enhanced or complete information to present to the IC. No, so we would get the focus here, or the purpose from an ESG perspective would be to have an ESG adjusted risk return profile, no? So that in the risk return profile already, the assessment of the ESG risk are incorporated. So if the decision for the investment is positive, then we have, of course, the monitoring and engagement phase, no? And here, the focus for ESG is mostly to keep track of this risk. How is this done? Through reporting, to engage with the different fund managers from time to time to see, no, and prevent that all the exclusions and everything that was analyzed during the due diligence phase is still the same, that has not completely been broken down, no, or there that has been improved in any case. And also on incident management, no? What is most typical in this incident management? So reporting from year to year, if, for example, there's an investment related to construction, if there had been any incidents, no, in the construction work from the workers, if the security measures are being followed, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, we have the exit moment, no, where here I think it's important the focus on the narrative, no, on the ESG value creation narrative. So how has the investment improved in terms of ESG aspects over the tenure in the portfolio? This can look like as that a fund has created a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, no, over 10 years of tenure, no, in the portfolio. It can be that they have incorporated a person dedicated to ESG, no, that it's actively working into the investment process. And here it's important, no, as investor, to really understand this value creation narrative over time, no, and throughout, since the origination and screening phase until the moment of exiting an investment. Any comments or any thoughts here? In your experience, where do you think most investors focus, no, in terms of ESG? Do you think there's a particular phase?
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the majority of investors, they're not either Article 9 or other articles, especially in Europe. I think they're more focused on the monitoring and due diligence side of things, but due to, I would say, legal constraints, regulatory constraints at first, and very few ones are actually focusing on any of the other verticals. No?
Totally.
What do you think?
No, I agree. I think so. I think the majority of investors, as you very right said, unless they're Article 9, they focus on due diligence and monitoring, no? Although I think most investors also for Article 6 also have the screening phase, no? That I think
Yeah, of course,
the
like us.
exclusion against
Sure,
the
sure.
exclusion list is also something very typical that the majority of investors in Europe, no, have to comply with
You're
and
totally
have to
right.
have in
Yes.
place. Good. And I think we all know that there are multiple standards to follow, that there's a lot of regulations coming out. The European Union is recently developing a lot of guidelines for the SFDR. But what are the main frameworks, no, that investors are using nowadays, and why are they important? No, so I think, in my view, frameworks are important to provide a structure and to be able to compare, no, across industries, across portfolios, or to compare with peers as well, no? So that we are making sure that we are not comparing oranges to apples. So I've tried to list the main ones, no? Of course, there are more. We also have the TFCDs, but I think it's, for example, is very specific. So keeping a general overview, no, on the private sector investment space, what are the main frameworks? So first, we have the UN responsible investment principles, that this as such is not a framework itself. It's a voluntary investor-led framework that outlines 6 main principles for incorporating ESG issues into investment decision-making, analysis, and so on, but it's not prescriptive, no? It focuses on a goodwill, some ideas on how investors should act to avoid certain things, to incorporate this environmental and social perspective. And this is a list, no, where some investors, mostly international, no, investors, and of course big organizations such as DFIs, align towards to and sign, no, in a public manner, no, these 6 principles. They subscribe to them. Then we have the and please stop me at any time, the IFC performance standards. Yes, Lorenzo, you wanted to say something?
No, please go ahead.
So I would say this is one of the main global, no, or more accepted performance standards. The IFC performance standard, they defined a minimum requirement for managing environmental and social risk. I think here the key is that it is the framework that it's mostly applied by private investors, because it provides a very practical benchmark for ESG screening and assessment during due diligence, no? It provides very clear guidelines on how to manage the risk, identify those risks, and it provides a really good benchmark, no, for comparing. If you have a very different portfolio and a diverse portfolio, it allows you to have a good comparison, no, within your portfolio and also against other peers, no, or other investors. Then we have SASB. SASB, it is mostly used in the US, and the idea of SASB is that they present the financial material ESG topic by sectors, no? So for example, again, construction, then this framework already provides you what are the key material risks if you're investing in construction, and the issues on a sector by sector basis. So it's a very complex framework that has multiple layers of risk. So depending if you're a specialized investor only investing in construction, it's going to be easier, but if you have a diversified portfolio in terms of sector exposure, it can become really complex, no, in terms of risk assessment. Now, in the recent years, they've been consolidated under what they call ISSB, but the idea is to have a global baseline based on sector by sector. And then we have GRI, which is similar to SASB. GRI, it's a bit more used and common in Europe, although it's also a global performance framework. And the focus of GRI is on a broader stakeholder ESG risk assessment, no? So in opposition to SASB that goes sector by sector, it takes a double materiality approach, incorporating financial, social, and environmental risk, and looking at the risk at the stakeholder level, no? So they integrate customers' risk into the decision making. They incorporate the whole value chain, no, of an investment, or when incorporating, when looking at the underlying investments of a fund, no, they would look at the suppliers, the risk management for the end customers, and so on. And then I think lastly, no, and since this is one that applies to us all, no, we have the EU, the European Union regulation, the SFDR, that is the regulatory classification for Article 6, 8, and 9, that it's basically a way to categorize how to classify and disclose sustainability risk and objectives. So for example, we all know, no, that an Article 6 per se has no ESG focus. So this refers to products that do not promote ESG characteristics, but an Article 6, for example, must disclose how sustainability risks are considered, or clearly explain which ones are included and which ones are not, no? So ESG is not a defining feature for this type of products, funds, investments, but it should be included, no? It's not part of the investment objective, but it requires to disclose this ESG risk, no? In contrary, Article 8 promotes ESG characteristics, and Article 9 is what we call the impact fund, no? That goes beyond ESG on generating additional positive value on the society and the planet. Any questions here or comments on these frameworks? Are they familiar to you? You've heard about them before, or also in your investments? Do you see these frameworks or funds applying or adhering to any of these standards? Not really.
Well, I think the only thing that we're all very familiar with are the SDRs, right? Because it touches us, ourselves.
And for the fund, sorry, Lorenzo.
No, go ahead, Massim.
For the fund we invested, basically the few that are providing sustainability reporting are applying the SFDR.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they're all the European based, no? I imagine the investments that you're doing in the USA do not adhere to any of these principles.
Despite the fact, Belen, what I find more and more is that also there is a little bit more attention also in the US about sustainability. The only thing is that they build the framework themselves. So each fund defines its own ESG and sustainability policy, but it doesn't refer really to a best practice in the industry. It's just internally built, let's put it like that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing, Massimo. So I think now, as the focus of today's session, no, and also what Lorenzo was introducing is to be very practical, no, and also understand a bit the work we've been doing in parallel with Massimo and the rest of the team is on the ESG process for Rancilio, no, and it's basically split down into two main phases, no, or steps, we can say. One is a screening, and the other one is an ESG assessment. So we're going to be seeing now in practice. But let me take you quickly. And of course, Massimo, feel free to jump in, as you also know this one really well, no?
By heart, I would say.
I have a tattoo in front of me.
But well, the first step is quite straightforward. And I think it's something that you've been doing since the beginning, no? It's not something new. It's a matter of formalizing into the process. That is screening against the exclusion list, no? So in accordance to your articles of incorporation, there are certain exclusion criteria that set the basis for your policy, no? And in this policy, there are 8 exclusion categories. Any exposure to these categories would disqualify an investment opportunity, no?
Exactly.
Correct. And I think here we have the exclusion categories. They're known probably to each of you, no, and are quite straightforward, but they have to do with illicit economic activities, exposure to tobacco and alcohol, weapons and military, which currently is a very controversial area, no, in the moments that that we're experiencing now, these geopolitical shifts, no, in the current environment. But we also have gambling, pornography, human trafficking, endangered species, and human rights. So this would be the first step, right? So screening the investment opportunity against these exclusion categories. If there are no exposure to these categories from an ESG perspective, this would mean that we move on with the process into the ESG assessment, no? That happens in the due diligence phase. So this all is happening in parallel or at the same time together with the normal investment process, no? It's a part that happens in parallel, no, or at the same time. So here I wanted to stop for a second in understanding a bit how was the process of building this tool and how we build, no, the different questions and what we chose, no, as a best practice or as a standard to start working on. And we developed the tool based on the IFC performance standards. Why? As we were discussing before, IFC performance standards is a global recognized framework. It is widely used by private investors, and it has a very practical approach, no? So it would give us a bit more confidence and also robustness to the overall ESG framework to leverage on existing practice that is recognized, no, also and used by other investors. And to give you a bit more context on how the IFC performance standards work, it's focused on 8 principles. Each principle comes with a categorization of different risks, no? That it's also broad enough for investors to be able to adapt the questionnaire or to build their framework as they wish, but also prescriptive enough to be able to follow the 8 principles, no? In the case of Rancilio, we were assessing, and out of the 8 principles, there were 2 principles that were directly related to the investment activity. That is the principle 1, that it's assessment and management of environmental and social risk and impacts, and second, labor and working conditions. Just to give you a bit of a sense of what's left out, no? Some of the other principles have to do with management of indigenous lands and principles that in the case of Rancilio do not apply, no? So that's why it was focused on these 2 first principles. And again, just to take a step back, no? So we were just discussing a few minutes ago about the IFC performance standards and about SFTR and the regulatory compliance, no? That needs to be done currently in Europe by being Article 6, no? The idea is to have a comprehensive understanding of the potential environmental, social, and governance risk, no? The objective of the investment is not to generate these changes, no? But to make the decision, the investment decision, informed and to have an adjusted risk return idea when making the investment decision informed by the management of this risk.
I would also, let's say, go a bit further with respect to what you just said, because in our case, it's not just about having an adjusted risk return profile, but this consideration and the result of the analysis that we carry out with this framework are actually a centered part of the risk profile that we assign to an investment. So despite the fact that we are Article 6 and blah, blah, one of the cool thing about the work that we did together in coming out with this framework is that we actually, let's say, took ESG at the center of our investment decisions in a way, right? Of course, it factors within with also all the other risks that we have, but it's definitely part of the process that we use today.
I think you're right, and I think you brought a really important point, no, Lorenzo. I think if we go back to a traditional investment cycle, we would see that ESG is integrated in a way that can generate a go or no go for an investment opportunity, no?
Yeah.
And how does it happen, no? If we see first at the screening, if we identify any exposure to the 8 categories that are outlined, and then also at the due diligence, no? Which we're seeing now on how does the assessment work in practice. As I was just saying, it is a tool that it's used, exercised during the due diligence process. And it's basically composed of 14 questions that go from 1 to 5. But there are certain questions, and now we're going to see it in a second, so bear with me, that can be considered exclusionary. So a response of no or a score to 1 to some of these questions indicates a major red flag or a signal for exclusion, no, of the investment. So it's also part, no, or it can affect a lot the decision on the investment, no. It can generate a no-go. So as I was saying, the questions range from 1 to 5, and there are 14 of them, and then we get a final ESG risk result. You can see here, no, that the results are categorized in low risk, medium low risk, that meets the expectations, medium risk that also meets the expectations, medium to high risk that presents material ESG concerns. So a deeper look and assessment needs to be done. And then high risk, no, where we would be identifying serious ESG risk or failures. So let me show you very quickly the tool in practice. I'm sharing again my screen.
And just to reinforce what Belen is telling you, is saying, I mean, it's a practical tool. It means that it's part of our current due diligence. Whenever we apply with due diligence for a fund, we are trying to cover all of these aspects that Belen is explaining to you. And
despite the geography, I would say.
Despite the geography, it means that, of course, substance prevails on formality. So also for the US fund that are not so much regulated, we try to collect as much information as possible in order to fill in all the questionnaire and have a reasonable outcome and so reasonable valuation on the ESG side.
Thank you. Are you seeing the Excel or
yes.
Okay, good. So if I move it, you're seeing it already, no? I'm not so used to Zoom. Great. So here we'd see that this is the main tool. And as Massimo was saying, the focus of this tool is on practicality, no? On being able to actually assess with the information that normally the team receives from the different funds when assessing an opportunity, being able to assess this ESG risk. And as we were just discussing, it all starts with the exclusion list, no? Let me put it a bit bigger, no? This is the first step, the initial screening, no? So it goes exclusion category by exclusion category, includes some hints, no, or some descriptions to guide the person doing the analysis in really being able to spot on. And when one says yes, no, there's also the space, no, to justify or not, and also include some links, no, to in some of the categories. For example, the human rights and OECD guidelines. It already includes the links, so one, when doing the assessment, can easily go there and check again, no, to see if any red flags or any potential hints are being described, no. So it can really help the work of the analysis. So everything is well on the initial screening from the ESG perspective. We would jump into the ESG assessment, no, that, as we were saying right before, it's based on the IFC standard. So here we have the first IFC standard, and the second IFC standard, that apologies because something has happened with the format. But we will see here that these are the red questions that can be exclusionary. What type of questions are we looking at it, no? I think these are matters that we can call it ESG or not ESG, but are very important, no, in when making the investment decision, no. Is there a functioning board or a governance body in place? Whether there are conflicts of interest disclosed and managed appropriately? If the company has or the fund any policy, no, on anti-corruption, if they're being compliant or being audited, and so on. Then we have other questions, such as if they incorporate ESG consideration to investment decision making. But for example, this is not exclusionary, no? If we find a fund that has not included any ESG processes into their decision making, it doesn't mean that it's exclusionary, no? If they don't assess ESG risk during the due diligence, it's also not exclusionary. Just to give you a sense, no? And I think we can share this after also, Massimo, no?
Absolutely.
With the colleagues, so they can also have a closer look if they're interested at the main questions, no? Also, a key question that is considered exclusionary is if there any written policy on labor and working conditions, no, to avoid situations, no, or the risk of child labor, modern slavery, and so on and so forth. So here we can see it's a mock-up, no, with some figures that have been added. So in this investment that is made up, this would mean that there's a conclusion here, no, and a rating that help us categorize the ESG risk of this opportunity, no. And in this case, this would be minimum risk, and it would be exceeding the expectations. Any questions on the tool development?
No questions on my side, as I follow the development of the tool by two masterminds, which are yours, Belen, and Massimo's. But I would say that it clearly highlights the fact that we try to keep a very practical approach and try to use the tools that ESG gives us to actually highlight the aspects where it's not just, let me say, which are important no matter the angle or point of view you're taking, right? So, is there a functioning board for a fund, or is there any? I mean, all those governance questions are actually super important for us. Aside from, I'll put it in a blunt way, but aside from ticking the ESG box in a way, right? So we really try our best, and thank you, Belen, because you did an amazing job in actually guiding us to make it as more aligned with our own work, but also as more practical as possible.
Totally.
We will share the tool with the rest of the audience for sure. But let me say that this was one of the, let's say, one of the key pillars that made our new risk policy shine lately. So super.
That's good to hear. Yeah, and if you have any questions on the tool, no, for Massimo, Lorenzo, and myself, always happy to chat, no, and also to incorporate feedback, or if you see any best practice or something from other funds or managers. I think it's an ongoing process, no? There can always be improvements.
Absolutely.
While keeping the practical approach. Good. So also looking at time and in the sake of discussion, no, and exchanging a bit, I wanted to share some examples from others, no, to have a sense of what are others doing in this ESG space, no. So I think an example that I wanted to bring to the table is an exclusion list, no? So starting from different phases of the ESG and investment cycle. And here we have the Association of European Development Finance Institutions, where I think all of the European state members are taking part, no, with their development finance institutions. They have this exclusion list, no? And it focuses on excluding forced labor, child labor, illegal activities, cross-border trade in waste, destruction of high conservation value areas, radioactive materials, pornography and or prostitution, racist and or anti-democratic media, and then they also exclude against alcohol, tobacco,
but with the exception of beer and wine, so they're way more criticized than us. Okay.
Exactly. No, I think this is an interesting one. And also thinking about the Rancilio exclusion list, no? What do you think? Do you feel that the current exclusion list that we have in place at Rancilio, it's comprehensive? It's similar to this one and similar Is there anything that brings your attention except the beer of the wine? I think that's a very interesting one. But also for me was interesting cross-border trade in waste and waste products, for example. No, this is super specific.
Yeah. Well, I would say that then I'll leave Luca or the rest of the pack to give their take. But our list reflects the sort of values with which we actually conduct ourselves and our investment decisions. So, I mean, it's true that today I mean, in the last few years, we saw a shift in terms of how the general public and the investment space is thinking about weapons and military, for instance. But let's say, we stand by the principles that guided us in developing the two exclusion lists, which are the very same for both compartments in a way. So the first one is back from 2022, but it's the way that Luca has approached investments since his very beginning. And the second one from 2024, which is the very same. So despite the wind shifts in one sense or the other, we keep standing by what we have in those lists. Then, of course, you can be as specific as you want, saying, okay, alcohol, no, but wine and beer, yes, okay. But it's more of a way of giving us sort of some guiding principles, no? A way of thinking about investments and being super, super, let's say, to pay a lot of attention in looking at investments based on the list itself.
Totally. Totally. It's a way of putting into practical terms, no? The main values, no? That guide the investment decision.
Yeah, and
Somewhere.
it's the most practical say manifestation. I don't know if it's a word in English of ESG in practice. Sorry, the game of words, right? So because you can assess and evaluate in any way you want with any sort of framework we might come up with. But at the end of the day, it's these our list is the way we actually put in practice what we have in mind in terms of principles.
Totally. Thank you, Lorenzo. Does anyone want to share also on the exclusion list? Oops. We can also look at an example, no, of the next step in the investment cycle, that it's from Armitage, that it's a boutique investment firm from Australia, no? And similar to you, for example, they're not ESG focused, but they integrate ESG as a risk management tool, no? And here I found interesting that they have disclosed, no, very publicly, how they assess at the due diligence stage the environmental, social, and governance risk, no? And they have, for example, on the environmental side, they look at low carbon transition and they categorize the risk exposure into low, medium, and high, and natural resource management, product sustainability. Here, I think they're looking at the value chains, no, in the sense of material sourcing, packaging, promoting the recyclability, no, or the reusement of products. On the social side, I think it's interesting how they focus on customer relation, community relations, and modern slavery. And then as an internal stakeholder management, no, on very HR driven aspects, no, of the social risk in terms of talent management, inclusion and diversity, employees' rights and well-being. And then lastly, on governance, a strong analysis, no, on the governance quality in the sense of board independence, the diversity and tenure of the board, the audit, the remuneration for the board members, and then also on ownership and control, audit, tax payments. So what do you think about this in comparison to the Rancilio ESG assessment tool? Do you think it differs a lot? Do you think it's similar? Do you think we could
I
incorporate
mean,
some elements from here, or we
from,
could also
from,
lend to Armitage
from
some
the framework
ideas?
itself, it's easy to understand that I assume that they invest in direct businesses, so they invest directly in companies.
Mm,
And in a way, I mean, makes sense, right? So you invest in a single company, you need to evaluate a single company. You can go through all all the elements of this list, right? You can really evaluate how they. Not that you can't do that also with funds, but it's different, right? So you can evaluate carbon emission, you can evaluate how they're actually managing their energy, customer relations, so on and so forth. In a way, I go back to this thought that I have that the exclusion list is the most, let's say, practical and uh, let's say hard tool that we have, no?
mm,
And then based on that, you and Massimo did an amazing job in developing a due diligence framework and monitoring framework that of course leans more on the governance side of things, right? And the labor side of things, as you said about the two principles that you chose. So I
mhm.
think that everything that is here is super relevant for anybody investing in a direct business, right? A little bit less for us, but
Yeah,
that's my take.
totally less relevant for managers focusing on fund investments.
A bit, yes.
Yeah, and on the governance side, I found very interesting, no, how they break down, no, the board quality, no, to very
Really, that
specific
is, yes,
categories.
that is super
I
interesting.
think
Yes.
that's a very interesting one. And then I'm aware of time. I don't want to keep you for long, but I wanted to share a very different example, no, of showcasing and managing the ESG risk. And in this case, we're sharing about Actis, that it's an investor in infrastructure. They focus a lot on energy transition, and this is for their public report, right, on how to disclose on the ESG risk management. So you see here, this is a table that showcases portfolio sector exposure to high risk related to climate, no? So we have the risk type, so extreme heat, flood, drought, wildfire, tropical cyclone, earthquake, landslide, water stress, changing air temperature, changing precipitation patterns. So, and here the different type of investment, no?
Yes.
Renewables, gas, logistics and warehousing, real estate, transmission, data centers, toll, no? So they're investing in infrastructure, no? So it's very specific. But I wanted to showcase, no, for example, on the previous one that we were looking, no, at Armitage, the ESG assessment is very broad. No? They're looking at a general perspective on each of the categories, and we here have an example that on the climate side goes really in depth, no, and very specific to the investments related to infrastructure against very specific climate risk. Any thoughts on this type of communication, no, and showcasing the different risk exposure for a portfolio of investments? It's interesting, right? I have included the link to
What
the
is
report.
interesting, what is interesting is what you highlighted before, that you can take such different perspectives and point of views on the very same topic, right? Or on the
Mm,
very same framework. So for us, let's say, taking in views that are so different allows us to actually focus on, okay, what might be what's out there, and then what is relevant for us at Rancilio Cube.
mhm,
And yeah, again, as before, I think that for us, the governance side of things are more practical. While the climate ones, like the ones here, either you go in depth with the investments that every fund that we are invested in, every companies of the funds we're invested in do, or it's very difficult to actually,
Yeah,
with
it's
an
a
analysis
tough
like
one,
this
no?
one.
Leveraging the level of depth, no? But I think at the end of the day, and also discussions that Massimo and I were having, were a lot around being practical and coming up with a framework that makes sense and adds information, no, and actually helps, no, in the investment process, and also taking into account, as you were saying, Lorenzo, no, at the beginning, the exclusion list that already takes out quite a lot, no, it's a hard criteria, and then understanding what is key, no, for the different categories, but I think, yeah, also the point here is being able to see, no, how different the ESG analysis can look like, no, depending on your goal, the type of investments you do, the type of investors you have, no. Of course, I think this is very investor driven, but this is a bit the message that I wanted to convey. And yeah, I think we're reaching the end of this session, no? A few minutes late. Apologies, no? But I think this was practical, no? And that you gain an understanding of the ESG process for Rancilio, a bit of understanding that beyond being Article 6, no? What it means to a manager such as Rancilio, the ESG perspective, what is the value that adds throughout the investment cycle, and also a few examples, no, of how others are doing and the main frameworks out there, no, so that we know a bit when we hear about SASB, a little bit what is it that we're talking about, or GRI. And I will be sharing with you the materials, and here I have included also some additional information, no, and articles on this topic, and some reports in case any of you is interested to expand a bit more on this topic. And as always available for an email chat. Yeah, thank you so much.
Grazie Belen.
Thank you,
Grazie
Belen.
mille.
Thanks a lot.
Ciao, grazie.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao, grazie. Ciao.